Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Hope you are well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Sorry for a slight delay today, but was a bit busy. And if I sound a bit tired, it's because I am a little bit tired. How the audio is sounding. I think it sounds like a little bit low. Anyway, let's get started. Let me pull up my presentation for today. Here we go. Share screen. Okay. All right. Okay. Let me just jump straight into it. Okay. So it's that time of year again, of course. Hajj is around the corner. So I wanted to discuss a little bit about recurring issue I see, which I've called here the symbols of Allah versus Shirk. So I'd recommend you check out. I think I called that live stream the modeling of Shirk. I'm not sure, or maybe a different one. But anyway, there was a live stream number 88, which was called the Mushrik, which has some ties to this one. There's also number 78 and number 114, all of which we sort of discussed the issue of Shirk and some of the misconceptions around it. I also have a post on Reddit called Shirk Fanaticism, where I discuss some of the really bizarre statements that people, especially among the Quranist community, that come out with saying, this is Shirk, that is Shirk, everything is Shirk. One of the oddest ones was somebody saying that they're worried that loving their sister is Shirk, right? And a bunch of other things, really, really strange things. And it's because a lot of people are just very confused about it and very afraid of it, of course, because there's a lot of scaremongering about it. And people get into this OCD sort of state, psychological state, where they just see Shirk in everything and behind everything. Now, some of you might be sick of the the topic of Shirk on this channel. We know we've discussed it at length, but it still remains a contentious issue, right? And so it's something that needs to be continuously mentioned, right? And it's become such an issue now that it's almost like a stereotype, a kind of a stereotype is emerging about Quranists, that they are just constantly labeling others as mushrik, shirk, mushrik. There's just constant accusations like that, right? Coming from Quranists towards others. Okay, so this topic is still very much so important to understand. And with respect to that, we're going to be looking at the issue that you see quite a bit, right? The issue of the black stone and the Kaaba. Okay, so I'll mostly be speaking about that today. So of course, I'm sure you've all seen this. There are some who are convinced that either the black stone or the Kaaba are an idol, basically, that these are pagan idols, and they're performing any kind of rites around the Kaaba or kissing the black stone or both, that constitutes shirk, right? And that's just basically idol worship, and Muslims who are doing this are just mushrikeen and all the rest of that stuff. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about that and showing why I don't think that is the case at all. Okay, my main argument centers around one simple claim, that both the Kaaba and the black stone and many other things as well, right, are among the sha'air, or the symbols of Allah, which is mentioned in the Quran, right? And that to magnify them or to extol them, ta'azim, as the Quran says, right? وَمَنْ يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ, and whoever makes ta'azim, venerates them, extols them, magnifies them, to make them great, right? To do something which to towards them, that indicates you see them as great things, as big things, to big them up, basically, right? Ta'zim is literally to big them up, okay? To big up, ta'zim, the sha'ir of Allah, is from the taqwa of the hearts. It comes from where? It comes from taqwa in the hearts. That's what the Quran says. Meaning, to be moved to do so, to do this ta'zim, to big up these sha'ir of Allah, it comes from the feeling of taqwa, which is in the hearts, right? And taqwa is in the hearts, right? Taqwa is something which is in the hearts. And this is the verse which says that. It's part of some other verses which I've mentioned before, and I'll mention again. But it says ذَلِكَ, right? ذَلِكَ. And this will come up later because ذَلِكَ is referring to the previous verse where it describes the mushrik. And that was the focal point of my live stream number 88 about the mushrik, about how the Quran depicts a real mushrik. Okay, and it contrasts those verses, that Surah Al-Hajj, contrasts that, right? The real mushrik versus somebody who is actually performing rites towards the sha'ir of Allah, right? That they are different things. Anyway, so the verse says, ذَلِكَ وَمَنْ يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِنْ تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. That is so, and whoever honors the symbols of Allah, honors, venerates, magnifies, extols, bigs up the symbols or the rights of Allah, indeed it is from the piety of the heart. It's from the taqwa of the hearts. Okay, so idols, on the other hand, are representations of deities. Okay, an idol is supposed to represent a deity, another god, right? What the sha'ir of Allah are not seen as deities. They're not seen as idols. Nobody looks at the black stone and thinks it's an idol. Nobody looks at the Kaaba and thinks it's an idol, right? Nobody venerates it as a different deity, okay, as a representation of another deity. That's not the case, okay? So to venerate the sha'ir of Allah is from the taqwa of the hearts, according to the Quran, while venerating something as an idol is completely different. It's just completely different. It's not the same thing at all. An idol is a representation of another deity. No one venerates the black stone like that, okay? Nobody does that, right? Nobody thinks the black stone, I've heard all these claims, right? The black stone forgives your sins or anything like that. No, nobody thinks that. Okay, so this is all just it's a superstition with respect to shirk. There's a lot of superstition when it comes to shirk, which has developed within the Quranist community, I would say. Okay, and those in the grips of it, they're just going to spend the rest of their lives essentially complaining about the black stone, about the Kaaba, about Zamzam water, about Safa and Marwa. For those, of course, they reinterpret them that they are not just hills, right? They have to. They're not these hills in Mecca, Safa and Marwa, because they're mentioned in the Quran as being of the sha'ir of Allah. So they have no way around that. But still, they'll still complain about, Safa and Marwa, the hills, right? And they'll continue doing that without ever actually advancing in any understanding beyond that superficial, superstitious understanding of what shirk is supposed to be. And we've mentioned it many times on this channel. Shirk is dangerous. It is very lethal. It's very bad because it is about ibadah. It's about servitude. It's about obedience. It's about khudu', about submissiveness to others' orders, to things like that. Okay, shirk in that capacity causes you to do a lot of harm. Right? The Quran mentions how the shuraka of the mushrikeen caused them to kill their children. Okay, the idols did not do that. The idols do not do that. The inanimate idols do not do that. The Quran talks about how the mushrikeen and their shuraka will be in hell, speaking to each other or condemning each other, right? That God is going to resurrect the idols. Allah is not going to resurrect Hubul and Lat and Uzza and these inanimate things and throw them into hell. They've done nothing wrong, first of all, right? Even if they could feel anything. These are just inanimate objects, okay? So anyway, essentially, there's this kind of, like I said, this superstitious idea of shirk, just anything which seems odd to somebody, they will throw the label of shirk towards it, right? It's like they have they get this the ick, as they say sometimes now, right? The feeling of the ick towards something, towards any kind of veneration, and they'll just slap shirk on top of it, say that's shirk, right? Wherever it's somebody kissing the hand of their father. I've seen, if you check out my post, shirk fanaticism, I put a link to a few examples of, people claiming such odd things are shirk. Anyway, the other thing is that rituals done towards inanimate idols or objects is not shirk. Like, again, this is sort of like going on from what I just said, that real shirk is about ibadah. But, if you dig into the Quran, you will see that when there are inanimate objects which have some rituals done towards them, those rituals are not described as ibadah. Okay, they're described with a different term, i'kaf, and I've mentioned this before in other live streams as well. So the Quran describes rituals done towards inanimate idols not as ibadah, like in servitude, because you can't do servitude to them, really, right? But it uses the word i'kaf, and there are many examples. I've just put the references here because I didn't want to have to, copy all the verses one by one. I want to sort of like keep this as brief as possible. This example here, for example, in Surah Al-A'raf, where Musa and Bani Israel, after they crossed after crossing the sea, usually after crossing the sea, they see people doing i'kaf to some idols that they have. يَعْكُفُونَ عَلَى أَصْنَامٍ لَهُمْ. The verse says, don't say يَعْبُدُونَ أَصْنَامٍ لَهُمْ. Don't say they are ibadah to some, idols that they had, right? It says يَعْكُفُونَ, this word i'kaf, right? i'kaf. يَعْكُفُونَ عَلَى أَصْنَامٍ لَهُمْ. Okay? And then again, in Bani Israel to Harun, right? When they start worshipping the golden calf, which is obviously an inanimate object, right? They are, worshipping it, but not in ibadah. The Quran never ever says that they have done ibadah to the golden calf, right? It never says that. Never uses the word ibadah with them. Instead, what's said here in this example is that they reply to Harun, who tells them to, you've been led astray. They say, we will not stop being in i'kaf towards this golden calf. لن نبرح عليه عاكفين is the word عاكفين, until Musa comes back to us. We'll continue in our i'kaf towards this golden calf until Musa comes back. Meaning what? We'll continue doing these rituals to it, bowing to it, maybe doing tawaf around it, whatever. Okay, we'll continue doing this i'kaf, this devotion to it, until Musa comes back and tells us if this is wrong or right. Okay, and then again, when Musa does come back and he speaks to the Samiri and he wants to expel him, he says, look towards the spot that you were in i'kaf towards. فانظر إلى إلهك الذي ظلت عليه عاكفا, right? And it says we're going to burn it and throw it into the sea, etc. Okay, but again the word used is i'kaf, this عاكفا. Okay, Ibrahim as well, to his father and his people. What does he say? He says, what are these statues? ما هذه التماثيل, statues that you are عاكفين towards it, right? التي أنتم لها عاكفون. Right. ما هذه التماثيل التي أنتم لها عاكفون. What are these statues that you are being devoted to or doing rituals towards? Okay, and in another verse, also in the story of Ibrahim, in a different surah, their reply is, we are in ibadah to these idols, right? So we are always doing i'kaf toward them, right? So they're saying that their i'kaf, their ibadah towards them is this i'kaf. I've explained this before, that I think that this is their own misconception, right? That they think that they are in ibadah, and that's why it was actually an actual question. And Ibrahim later on continues sort of like trying to show them that no, you're not actually in ibadah to them, right? Anyway, the point is that that's the word used, okay? Not ibadah. Yet this i'kaf, the same word of doing i'kaf towards his idols, which is condemned here and here and here all over the Quran, it's precisely what we are supposed to do with respect to the Kaaba, right? Because that is why it was raised. Okay, ikaf to the Kaaba is why it was built. So Allah says to Ibrahim, وَإِذْ جَعَلْنَا الْبَيْتَ مَثَابَةً لِلنَّاسِ وَأَمْنًا وَاتَّخِذُوا مِنْ مَقَامِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ مُصَلَّى, and mention when we made the house, the Kaaba, a place of return for people and a place of security, and take, from the standing place of Ibrahim, a place of prayer. And we charged Ibrahim and Ismail, right? And we charged them, وَعَهِدْنَا, and we took a covenant with them, إلى إبراهيم وإسماعيل أن طهر بيتي للطائفين والعاكفين, right? Ikaf. Purify my house for those who perform tawaf and those who do ikaf. للعاكفين, those who are engaged in ikaf. Of course, the later tradition took that to mean i'tikaf. I'tikaf is, because they took the word for this word, which was taken to mean like devotion, they took it to mean i'tikaf, which means just staying in the mosque, right? Not leaving the house, staying in the mosque, and not going home, right? So people do that in the last 10 days of Ramadan. They'll do, they will say we're doing i'tikaf in the mosque, i'tikaf they would call it actually, which means stay in the mosque and not leave, and you stay the whole 3 days, 4 days, or the whole 10 days in the mosque. But anyway, here they have it translated that way, those who are staying there for worship. Okay, but I want you to understand that the word used here is akifin. Akifin. Okay, it's the same word in all of these verses. Same word in all of these verses. It's what Musa and Bani Israel saw the people doing to those idols, right? Ikaf. It's what Bani Israel were doing with the golden calf, Ikaf. It's what Musa said to Samiri, Ikaf. It's what Ibrahim asked his people, what are you doing? Ikaf. So of course it doesn't mean staying in the mosque, right? It's something being done to it, right? And even in this verse, we're not talking about the mosque, right? It's not talking about the mosque, it's talking about the Bayt, right? Tahira Bayti, make my home, my house, the sacred house, make it, purify it for Ikaf, for Al-Akifin. Right? What does that mean? People are going to stay inside the Kaaba? No, right? Well, it's not that. Right? It's not about staying overnight inside the Kaaba. وَالْعَاكِفِينَ وَالرُّكَّعِ السُّجُودِ, and the prostrating and the sujood. Okay? So why? Okay, if all of these things are wrong to do to these idols, right? Why is it okay to do this i'tikaf with respect to the Kaaba? And this answer is simple. It's because the Kaaba is from the sha'air of Allah, right? Allah is asking you to do it not towards the idols, not towards, the Kaaba itself as an idol, because it isn't an idol, but it is a symbol. It's one of the sha'air of Allah. So hence, that's right. Right after the verses about the rites of the Hajj and honoring and the magnifying in the house, we get these two verses. Okay, we get these two verses here, and they drive the point home that these are not idols, right? That doing the magnifying the house and the rights of Allah and the sha'air of Allah, it's not idolatry, it's not shirk. That actual shirk is something else, which again it is described here. Okay, the venerating the things and the symbols of Allah is from the taqwa of the heart. So it says, حُنَفَاءَ لِلَّهِ غَيْرِ مُشْرِكِينَ بِهِ, meaning what? Do all of these things, do all of these rites, towards the sacred house, the tawaf, Mount Arafah, all of this. حُنَفَاءَ لِلَّهِ غَيْرِ مُشْرِكِينَ بِهِ. Do it. It's been hanif to Allah without any shirk. And then it describes when you shirk billah, and whoever does shirk with Allah, what is that person like? What does that read like? فَكَأَنَّمَا خَرَّ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ, and then it is like someone who has has been hurled down from the skies, right? خَرَّ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ فَتَخَطَّفَهُ الطَّيْرُ, and then was snatched up by the birds or pecked by birds, right? Or flung by the wind to a distant place. Okay, في مكان سحيق. ذلك, thus, but whoever does ta'zeem of the sha'air of Allah, then that is from the taqwa of the heart. It's not shirk. That's what that means. Okay, whoever extols the sha'air of Allah, the symbols of Allah, then that's not shirk, right? The what's mentioned before, that's shirk. This is not shirk. Yeah, I think it's very, very clear and obvious. And if you want a more in-depth look at this verse, again, go back to live stream number 88, where I specifically looked at this, right? Because this is the example given in the Quran of the mushrik. So analyzing this example will really help you to understand what shirk is. Okay, so here's the question: what makes something of the sha'air of Allah? What does that even mean? Okay, so I mean, one of the main verses about that is, of course, the verse about Safa and Marwa, where it starts off and it seems pretty clear. I mean, it seems from the wording that there were people who were worried. So the early Muslims, they were worried, okay, that maybe is it okay to do this, to run between Safa and Marwa? I mean, this seems kind of pagan, right? As some people now would think, right? So it seems that some of the contemporaries of the Prophet, some of the Sahaba, actually thought that going between Safa and Marwa, they were worried that this could be a pagan rite, right? That this could be a pagan rite. And so they likely asked about that. And that's why we have that verse in the Quran in the first place, because they were worried, right? Because they were worried. If they had not been worried about it, we probably wouldn't have this verse. Okay, but they were worried about the Safa and Marwa, because it's sort of like, okay, Safa and Marwa, it's a bit sort of like I don't know, sort of like a side issue almost to everything else. Okay, you have the Kaaba, the house of God. That makes sense, right? The black stone, part of it, has always been part of it. Makes sense. Mount Arafah, where we go for Hajj, kind of makes sense. What is this Safa and Marwa? What is that? Why we have to go, run between these two hills? Okay, what's the point of that? But we are told in the Safa and Marwa min sha'airillah, right? The Safa and Marwa are from the sha'air of Allah. So whoever does Hajj or Umrah, then there's no blame upon them if they, do tawaf between them, which shows, of course, that that's not a part of Umrah or Hajj. You don't have to do them, right? The verse is clear, saying that it's almost like something which is optional. It's optional to do this, right? You don't have to do it. Okay, just like, again, like kissing the black stone or any of these other things, a lot of them are optional. Okay, so whoever does Hajj of the Bayt or I'tamara, then there's no blame on them if they do this tawaf between Safa and Marwa. And then the verse continues, saying that whoever does so, then Allah is going to show gratitude towards him, right? Allah is going to show gratitude towards that. Inna Allah shakirun alim. وَمَنْ تَطَوَّعَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ شَاكِرٌ عَلِيمٌ. Whoever does these things voluntarily, then Allah is shakirun alim. Allah is grateful and is knowing. But what makes Safa and Marwa from the sha'air of Allah? Why are they from the sha'air of Allah? Okay, the only answer we have for that is, the ancient understanding that this was part of the story behind, Ismail coming to Mecca, right? Ibrahim brought Ismail to Mecca, and he left him there with Hajar, right? And then she was one who ran between the two hills of Safa and Marwa, back and forth, hoping to see somebody standing on top of the mountain, and see some travelers, so that she could get some help, because she needed water for Ismail and for herself, of course. And then after that's when Allah revealed zamzam water for her, right? And so, of course, zamzam water, if Safa and Marwa are going to be part of the sha'air of Allah, zamzam water is going to be part of sha'air of Allah as well. It's going to be of the sha'air of Allah, obviously. Okay, why wouldn't it be, right? It's ancient well. But let's just think a little bit more deeply about what does that mean. Okay, what is that sha'air of Allah? First of all, I don't think it's irrelevant that the word for sha'air of Allah, the word being used in the Quran here, it comes from the same root as mashair, of feelings, right? Also shi'r, poetry, right? It's supposed to invoke feelings. The sha'ir is a person who feels or knows things by his feelings, right? Sha'ir, right? It's somebody who has that sensitivity to feel things. Okay, even a hair, that's again one of the links between shi'r and mashair and all of these, hair, right? You can feel even a hair on your skin, right? Sha'ara is a hair, okay? And then we also have this word shi'ar, the shi'ar, right? Also related to shi'ar, okay? Shi'ar is a slogan, right? What's the point of a slogan? It's supposed to make you feel something, okay? The shi'ar is supposed to make you feel something. You make a good slogan, to a battle slogan, for example, that everybody can shout out in the middle of battle. It's also pump you up, rile you up. Okay, it's a shi'ar, right? It imparts feelings. So, what are the shi'ar of Allah? You could say that they are the shi'ar of Allah are places or things that will evoke feelings of veneration and devotion to Allah, or to the memory of the events of Allah, of the stories of the prophets of the past, of things that happened. Okay, some symbolic quality or memory. Okay, these are the things which are sha'ir of Allah. And I don't think it's going to be the case that the only sha'ir of Allah in the whole world are Safa and Marwa and Mecca, things in Mecca only, right? That no other people in the whole world have sha'ir of Allah apart from the Arabs of Hijaz. No, of course not. Allah is Rabbul Alameen. He is the Lord of all the worlds. There are other places all around the world which can be considered sha'ir of Allah, right? And this is my sort of theory understanding of that. Okay, anything around the world which will help evoke the remembrance of Allah, or the people of Allah, or the things of the past, right? That these can be taken as sha'ir of Allah. Okay, or you can even think about it in terms of almost the opposite way. I mean, I'm not sure if this is a very good way of explaining it. Didn't have time to really, word this in the best way. Perhaps you can think of it in terms of these are the things that Allah Himself would feel for, if He were to feel as we do, right? So you have, for example, something like the Kaaba, right? It's something which one of His beloved servants raised up, okay? So there's a kind of feeling that can be attached to that, right? Or like I said, Safa and Marwa, right? That whole situation, they consider there's some feeling attached to that. Allah looks at these things with the eye of sort of like mercy or feeling or something like that. So, to extol these things where the Spirit of God was at worked through, okay? This is from the Shah. These are to extol those and venerate those things. It shows taqwa in the heart. It shows that you care about these things. You care about the things which Allah has done in the past. You care about the people through whom Allah changed things in the past. You care about the things, the structures, like the sacred house, that through which Allah, intervened or did things in the world. Okay, it shows some care and some feeling, sha'ir of Allah, right? So you venerate those things, right? It's not about worshipping them, of course. You're not going to be worshipping them. Okay, you can't actually worship these things. You can't worship the black stone. You can't worship the Kaaba. You can't worship the Mount of Arafah. Okay, but you can do ikaf, right? You can do ikaf to these things. You can show veneration in some way. Okay, so the sha'ir of Allah that we are aware of, pretty much, we can of course include the Kaaba, the whole of the Kaaba, Safa and Marwa, Mount Arafah. The sacrificial animals are also considered from sha'ir of Allah. There's a verse about that. Okay, وَالْبُدْنَ جَعَلْنَاهَا مِنْ شَعَائِرِ اللَّهِ. Quran says that the sacrificial animals, they are from the sha'ir of Allah. And there's a very interesting anecdote, or not anecdote, but it's part of the seerah, right? Part of the seerah was when the Prophet when he wanted to do the Umrah, right, which he was barred from doing. When he went to, this was at the time of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, before they sat down to do the treaty. Mecca, the Meccans had prevented the Prophet and his companions from going into Mecca in order to do the Umrah, right? And part of the negotiations that happened back and forth of that is that Quraysh would send different people to come and talk to the Prophet and talk to them. And one of those people that he sent, I think it was Urwa al-Thaqafi, if I'm not mistaken, but one of those people that Quraysh sent, right? And when he was coming, the Prophet, either he knew about him beforehand or from his bearing, whatever it was, but he knew that this was somebody who had extreme veneration for the symbols of Allah, right? He had extreme veneration for, he was a very religious person, right? He was a very devoted person. Anything to do with because of course, even though these were mushrikeen, they had this veneration, okay, for the Kaaba especially. So he knew this. He was somebody who had this veneration for the Kaaba and for the rites of Hajj and for all of these. So when he saw him coming, he told his companions to bring forth the sacrificial animals. Let him see them. Let him see what we've done with them. Because the sacrificial animals, what they would do is they would decorate them. Even now, if you were to go to Hajj, you decorate them, right? You make them look pleasing, right? You like you dress them up. It's because they are supposed to be like a gift for Allah, for Allah, like the sacrifice. So you choose the best animals that you have, and you make them look good, and all the rest of it. So the Prophet had that. Of course, he had the best of his animals to be sacrificed, and he quote unquote dolled them up, or had them dressed up in the sacrificial sort of like markings and stuff like that. And so when this man saw that, he didn't even bother to speak to the Prophet and his companions. He straight away went back to the Mecca and said, let these people go. Let these people come and do their rites of Hajj. Let them come, because these are these people who have definitely come just for the Hajj. They haven't come to fight or anything like that. They've just come for the Umrah, right? And the Meccans laughed at him and said, "What you mean? You went all the way there? You didn't even speak to him, right? What you did was you saw the sacrificial animals, and that that moved you enough to just come back and tell us to no." And then they refused. But then go back and read that section of the Sirah. But it shows you this idea that even the sacrificial animals, right, they were from the Sha'ir of Allah, right? They moved people, okay? Maybe they don't move us as much anymore, but at the time it was a big thing, because these animals were expensive. They were like the real wealth of people, and that for somebody to come and bring his best animals to be sacrificed, dress them up, and all the rest of it, and this showed devotion. This showed ta'zeem. Okay, so ta'zeem of the Sha'ir of Allah, right? They can include things like that. It doesn't have to be an inanimate object. It can be, like the sacrificial animals. Okay. What about the black stone? Okay, now the black stone is, of course, certainly one of the Sha'ir of Allah itself. Okay, and in fact, you could say it is really the essence of the Kaaba right now. It is the only part of the original Kaaba that remains. It's the only continuous part. Okay, the only part which was likely handled by Ibrahim himself when he was rebuilding the Kaaba, as well as Ismail and the Prophet Muhammad. Okay, so it's a kind of like a link to the past. So if any part of the Kaaba is supposed to make you feel something, have these sha'air, right? These feelings and these masha'ir, it's going to be the black stone, right? It is literally the part of the Kaaba which remains. Right, and you can think of it this way: that the rest of the Kaaba is going to be demolished and rebuilt, demolished and rebuilt, demolished and rebuilt, but that black stone remains. Okay, it remains as a continuous part of it. Okay, and I don't think that's a small thing, right? It is something which would evoke this. It's like a stability, like that it's always been there, that this has been part of the past. Way through which part of the Kaaba, all the way from the past, to which people have been doing Hajj since the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Okay, so that's it. I mean, I didn't go too deeply into everything else, but that's about it. That's all I have to say. Where shall I leave this? Let's leave it here. Okay, let me see what we have in the chat. Hey, Assalamu alaikum, Dragon Knight, good to see you. Hamid Man, Assalamu alaikum. Good to have you again as well. All right, good. So that's the end of this live stream. If anybody would like to come on and share anything, please do so. Otherwise, I will maybe close this early today. I don't have anybody backstage, so maybe I close this early. Before I do, maybe there'll be, if nobody's going to come on, maybe there's actually something I do want to, something very interesting. Don't know if I can find it now, though. Let me see if I can find it. There was a very interesting thing which I saw from... See, this is the thing which you will find with these Dawah people. I don't know how this came onto my feed, but it was Ali Da'wah, and he was speaking on this podcast called Getting There. Where he was speaking with this, and the Getting There podcast, I mean, it's done by this English lady, and they're discussing various things, right? And so she's basically interviewing Ali Dawah, about Islam, about his past, and trying to like open up dialogue between, because of course all the tensions in the UK between Muslims and non-Muslims, and the whole immigration stuff and all the rest of it. So they were discussing things, and you always find this, that among people like this, like Ali Dawah will be very sort of like almost will speak a lot like an extremist when it comes to Muslims, like to Muslims, but when they speak to non-Muslims, they soften their stance, just like they do when it comes to like the Quranist or the Qur'ani position, right? So when they're speaking to non-Muslims and trying to give da'wah and all the rest of it, they will talk all about the Quran and how miraculous the Quran is and how amazing it is, and its miracles, scientific miracles, numerical miracles, always being preserved, etc. Right? That the word of God is supreme. They will speak like Quranists to non-Muslims, and then of course when towards other Muslims, they belittle the Quran, its sufficiency, that it's all of that. Instead, it's how that with the Quran alone, you can't be guided, you can't be Quran is stupid, all the rest of it. Okay. Anyway, in this podcast interview, he talks about how the purpose of religion is to implement justice, which is, of course, that is correct, right? But it's he'd never say it in a different context, right? He'd always be talking about how it's about to worship Allah only and the rest of it. But here he was saying that it's the purpose of religion is to establish justice. So I want to maybe play that little part of it. Let me see if I can actually find it, though. Does this video have chapters? Hold on. Just give me a second to try and find it. I'm not sure if I'll be able to find it, to be honest. I don't know. I don't think I'll be able to find it. I don't want to waste everybody's time, but it was very interesting. I'd recommend everybody actually going and listening to that podcast, just because I thought that part was very interesting. Let me actually play it on here, and you can listen to it a little bit since I don't have anybody coming on. Stop sharing that. You share screen.
Then after we've done that, then we come and talk about justice to each other and human beings. So there's a verse in the
This is the
Quran where Allah
part.
says,
to execute justice, like
Yeah, this is actually the part I actually found it.
is to associate partners to God. So
What do you believe that Islam's? Yeah, they don't see any like.
so Islam is very particular when it comes to
Just let me check. Can everybody hear this? Can you all hear what is being said here? Widen that a bit. Is audio coming through? Can anyone just tell me in the chat if the audio is coming through when I play it? Yes. All right. Thank you. Let me increase it as well. A very interesting answer here.
the violation that you do to someone else. You can sin against God, which is wrong. But to sin against a human being, if you owe them money, you have to pay that back. So Islam is very particular. So I had that guilt inside me where I was like, there's so many people along the way that I've wronged. And how do I get redemption? That stuck with me a lot.
So it sounds like to me you were undoing the programming of the Western world.
Yes. Yeah.
Because we were having this discussion on here the other day, and I feel like when we come into this world, we have an innate knowing, like as children, like they're not born racist.
Yes.
Yeah, they don't see any like gender problem or anything like that.
Yes.
And then what happens is we get this programming within the world that like given to us by caregivers or what, even a map of the world that sometimes our parents can give us, and it can send us off into this direction.
Yeah.
And actually, funnily enough, we were having a discussion the other day. But what it sounds like to me is that you're almost having a spiritual awakening.
Yes. Yes, it is.
So for you picked Islam.
Yeah.
Now, at its core, what do you believe that Islam stands for?
So this is it. He says, she asked a very particular question. At its core, what does Islam stand for? And yeah, I expected him to be like, the Salafi answer, right? At its core, it's all about worshipping God alone, having no partners with him and all the rest of it. But he surprised me. He actually gave a Quranic answer, right? Because it's not just Islam, but the purpose of God revealing all of the messengers and the books was so that mankind can establish justice. Okay?
As a Christian woman who I've got Muslim friends, grew up, but to be honest with you, we've never discussed our religious beliefs. But I'm intrigued to know more about the faith. And as well, I feel that I'd be lying, or anyone be lying, like there's a shift happening in the UK. I feel like the tensions are heightened. And I guess the basis of this interview as well, which is what we'll go on to, is that I want to see how people can start living in harmony. But let's go back to the question. At its core, what do you believe Islam stands for?
I think the core of Islam is justice.
Okay.
Now, what is justice? We believe that the greatest injustice in the world is to associate partners to God. So, for example, we believe, for example, if you designed the studio and I came here today and I said, oh, this is actually, by the way, it's a brilliant studio.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
thanks to James.
It is. Okay. So this is very interesting what you just said. You said thanks to?
James.
Okay. James, the one who's... Okay. If I say, no, not James, I'm going to go and thank David.
Yeah.
You're like, Ali, who's David? No, I'm just going to go thank David. Yeah, but Ali, David is not the one.
Don't work here.
Good. The point is that I am giving credit to someone that doesn't deserve it. James is the one who put all this effort in.
Yeah.
He's done a fantastic job. For me to give the credit that due to James, to David, or someone who doesn't deserve it, that is called shirk. It means associating partners to God. So this is where we have a bit of a difference with the Christians. So we say that God Almighty is the one who created the heavens and the earth. He's the one that makes my heart beat. He's the one that provides for me. He's the one that's created the whole universe. I'm not going to go and thank Jesus or Muhammad. We need to give credit to who it's due to. Now, in the Bible, in the book of John, chapter 6.
All right, maybe I remember this better than it was. So you only give the beginning part of it, but I think what it was is that later on, she sort of like, she almost misses all his stuff about shirk and whatever, and she just says, so you've mentioned that the core of Islam is justice, right? And so she holds on to that, which I thought, okay, that's good. So even though he started off well, and then he just basically straight away tried to pour all of that sense of justice into one thing only, which was shirk, and according to me, of course, a faulty understanding of shirk as well. But nevertheless, she took on board the idea that the central thing about Islam is justice, which I thought, okay, that was actually pretty good. All right, okay. So I don't have anybody else backstage, so let's call it a night early today. Thank you all for tuning in and seeing, and inshallah, I'll see you in a live stream next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.